And now, stand-up community subscribers and listeners from around the globe, it's time to Stand Up with Pete Dominic, where we ask the important questions that impact you, your family, and your community. Such as, do curtains only need dry cleaning when used by 2 previous apartment tenants? And with the American Music Award winners announced, will MC Cardi B receive the recognition she deserves, and also puberty? And now, the podcast host who wields a machete only when he's reenacting Romancing the Stone, Pete Dominic.
Yes, that's true, and I'm going to clear-cut a path behind my house to take walks in the woods with my dog. So there is that occasion I'll use a machete as well. And I do have one, but I'm not telling you where it is, Pete. Oh, have I got a treat for you today, ladies and gentlemen. You're getting your money's worth if you pay. If you don't, sign up now for a paid subscription. Go to standupwithpete.com. A special episode of Stand Up today because I bring together 2 of the most respected scientists in their field of climate and COVID. I've got Dr. Michael Mann and Dr. Peter Hotez, who had a mutual respect for one another. I invited them to come on together, and they met each other for the first time virtually on this podcast. Now we are cooking with something that it makes it faster to cook with. Anyway, very excited about this interview. It is just a great idea. And this one was mine. I actually thought of this idea. I thought both these guys are great, and we can talk about the anti-science movement that they have been in the middle of in terms of being the targets of. So great conversations. Very happy to have you joining me here on the podcast. Today, it's Tuesday. Thank you for listening yesterday. And whenever you do, go to standupwithpete.com right now to subscribe. Welcome to new subscribers. I'll give you shout outs later this week, but we need more. Can we get a few more this week? I know it's Thanksgiving week and you're probably listening to a lot of podcasts because you might be in the car traveling somewhere for Thanksgiving. So it's actually a busy time for radio and audio podcasts and production. So excited to have you, new listeners. Subscribe to the podcast right now if you haven't already. It is Thanksgiving week. I hope that you are planning something fun, maybe relaxing, although it's not really the word that you think of when you think of Thanksgiving, but hopefully taking some time off from your normal routine and maybe being with some loved ones. Val and I are taking the girls up to my parents in Syracuse, and it's supposed to be snowy, and I'm getting in shape for skiing. I'm very excited. I've got goals. I hope you do as well. All right, well, let me get to the news as I do each and every day here at the top of the show, which is why it's a great show to subscribe to daily, because I give you a hell of a news recap in a way that nobody else can. And I know there's millions of podcasts out there, but nobody does it like me each and every day. Tell your friends. All right, it's time for a look at the last 24 hours of news. We call it, guess what? The last 24. All right, lots to talk about on today's show. Pfizer says its vaccine is 100% effective in adolescents. Jeff Bezos is donating $100 million to the Obama Foundation. President Joe Biden has picked Jerome Powell to be the Fed chief. He's named Lowell Brainerd to second in command at the U.S. Central Bank. And the Democratic-led House Select Committee investigating the January 6th attack on the U.S. Capitol, the ongoing coup, as I call it, has issued 5 new subpoenas to several Trump allies, including Roger Stone, spokesman Taylor Budowich, and InfoWars founder Alex Jones, which made big news yesterday. And NASA announced that it's going to crash a spacecraft into an asteroid to redirect its path, and it's launching that mission this week. So that's going to be pretty exciting to watch. Is there any way we could put Ted Cruz on that spacecraft? Speaking of which, yesterday, Steve Schmidt, who's got plenty of skeletons in his own closet, controversy in his own life. But he was on MSNBC yesterday, and he was criticizing Ted Cruz. Nicole Wallace asked him about it, because Ted Cruz was on CBS's Face the Nation the day before doing some election denial, big lie stuff. And I just thought this was such a great rant. I wanted to start with it. Here is Steve Schmidt on Ted Cruz.
Well, this is a historically despicable person, Nicole. He ranks right up there with Joe McCarthy. He's a demagogue. He's a liar. He is as irresponsible a United States senator as there has ever been in the history of the United States. He arrived in the Senate and has been a vandal towards our institutions and towards the idea of the truth and delivering it to the American people. So again, it's all nonsense that he's spouting out of his mouth. Again, we have a real-life autocratic movement in this country. Two elements in order to sustain one are the cynicism of its elites. Men like Ted Cruz, who've had every advantage, every opportunity, graduate of the most elite institutions in the country like Harvard Law School, who believe they can ride the Trump tiger, that they can play its supporters for fools, that they can benefit and accrete power to themselves. So when you look at somebody like Ted Cruz, you know he's lying. Everybody knows he's lying. Ted Cruz knows he's lying. But extraordinary cynicism coupled with the type of propaganda and that comes out of Fox News and the right wing can turn that nonsense into reality. And so Ted Cruz helped incite the January 6 attacks with his lying, with his instigations. He was, of course, revving up the crowd there that morning, and he has sought to whitewash it with more lying for many, many months. He is a truly despicable figure at a moment of real crisis. History will judge him very, very harshly should American democracy prevail in the years of fight that lie ahead between this extremist movement that is gaining strength, not decreasing in strength.
All right, Steve Schmidt on MSNBC absolutely excoriating the horrific Senator Ted Cruz of Texas. Also yesterday, Vice President Kamala Harris announced the Biden administration will be investing $1.5 billion from the coronavirus aid package to address the healthcare worker shortage in undeserved communities. Also announced the gap has closed in vaccination rates with underserved and high-risk communities. Here is the Vice President Kamala Harris yesterday.
Employers offered paid time off. Childcare providers offered drop-in services. Public transit agencies offered free rides to vaccination sites. Churches and barbershops opened their doors to become vaccination sites. And as a result of all of that work, today, as Dr. Murthy and Dr. Padilla have discussed, as a result of all that work, today we have effectively closed the gap in vaccination rates among Black and brown adults. Now, to be sure, there is still work to do to end this pandemic.
And speaking of the pandemic and COVID, I thought this clip was great from Deadline White House yesterday when Nicole Wallace had expert Dr. Vin Gupta on to examine some of the latest COVID news.
There's a story that just moved on the New York Times website. Dr. Osterholm, who's often on this program and others, is quoted as saying this about COVID. This thing is no longer just throwing curveballs at us. It's throwing 210-mile-an-hour curveballs at us. That's Dr. Osterholm. He said the virus has repeatedly defied predictions and continues to do so. Let me just show our viewers where things are right now. Cases are up 29% in the last 2 weeks. Hospitalizations are up 6%. In the last 2 weeks, deaths are down 9%, still coming down from the Delta surge. But I want to understand your recommendations for the holiday. The Times article says that despite cases ticking up and in some places being higher than they've been since the spring, everyone is going back to normal. Is that what we should be doing?
Good afternoon, Nicole. Great to see you. Absolutely. I think it's okay if you are 18 and older, you've gotten your 2-shot series, getting a booster if you haven't already, you can get near immediate benefit from that, Nicole, within, say, 48 hours. That's when that booster starts to take effect. 50 and older, vital you get that booster as quickly as possible. For 18 and up, you should still get it. The point here is that if that's you and you've gotten boosted, it is absolutely safe to travel. An airplane cabin, I say this as a pulmonologist, it's one of the safest places you can be around other people, fully masked. Air exchanges of the entire air circulation every 2 minutes, 100% of that air. So traveling by airplane to your end destination, making sure everybody's boosted, and that they took proper precautions en route, absolutely safe to gather indoors unmasked with others that are doing the same thing. Lastly, just say for everybody out there, since people want actionable advice here, know your body. Know your body, know your symptom profile. If you're developing a head cold, if you have a sore throat, get tested before you travel. I tell all my patients and anybody that asks, if you haven't already in the last 20 months, get an oximeter, something that measures your oxygen level, Nicole. And also just speak to your provider if you have any of those symptoms, because now we're going to soon have oral antivirals. So really nobody should die from this pandemic because we have such great tools, both vaccines and therapeutics.
Well, there you go. Dr. Vin Gupta on MSNBC yesterday. Now, also making some headlines. Didn't really want to play these clips, but I thought they were pretty interesting. It is President Trump's former lawyer and consigliere and handler, Michael Cohen. Hours after he was released from house arrest, he went out in front of the apartment building that he lives in and made an announcement. And then he went over to CNN's newsroom and chatted with Allison Camerata. But here he is. He was sentenced to 3 years in prison in December 2018. Pleaded guilty to crimes including campaign finance violations, tax evasion, and lying to Congress.
I will not cease my commitment to law enforcement. I will continue to provide information, testimony, documents, and my full cooperation on all ongoing investigations to ensure that others are held responsible for their dirty deeds and that no one is ever believed to be above the law.
I guess then he jumped in a car and headed up to CNN, where he sat down with my old friend Allison Camerata and had this to say.
But I do want to make this promise to you and to all of your viewers that I may have been prosecuted, and right now I am the only one, but I will not be the only one at the end of the...
For this crime?
For this crime and for others.
Who else will be prosecuted for the hush money payments?
I'm going to leave that to the district attorney and to the attorney general to continue their investigations and continue their...
but I mean, who else was involved?
Well, there were quite a few people that were involved. Eric Trump was involved. Obviously, Alan Weisselberg was already under indictment. Don Jr., Ivanka. There were a slew of people that were involved in this. I was certainly not alone. This wasn't a one-on-one conversation with Donald. It was a much bigger group. Let's just leave it at that.
All right, one more clip from Michael Cohen with Allison Camerata, which I think is worth sharing because I'm here and, well, why not?
So you believe that you have provided actual receipts, actual evidence of crimes being done, or did you just sort of directionally point them in the right?
Or a combination of both. A combination of both.
That's what you think, that you have. Mm-hmm. And you still, as you sit here today, believe that Donald Trump will be indicted for something.
I do.
And what do you think he will be indicted for?
I can't say. I don't want to get into the sum and substance of the investigation, other than to say that they are working very hard. And they're working on a daily basis in terms of bringing this indictment. And again, your point is very well taken. And it's one of the reasons I made the statement that I did today when I left the 500 Pearl Street, that I will continue to cooperate and I will continue to provide more documents and information.
All right, well, trigger alert, I'm going to play Donald Trump. 7 seconds of Donald Trump talking to this idiot asshole, Mark Levin, on Fox News. And I'm only playing it because this is Trump owning himself. Listen to this.
And the good news is Jimmy Carter's a very happy man because he's no longer going down as the worst president in history.
Well, he was talking, of course, about Joe Biden, but we all know he really is talking about himself and may not even realize it. Oh, and he also said gas costs $7.50 in California because who cares about anything remotely true anymore?
Gasoline was $1.87. That was a year ago. And now it's, I guess, just hit $7.50 in California, the rest to follow. And I predicted this.
Okay, nobody cares. Well, we do care about what's going on with racial injustice in this country as a result of people like Donald Trump and his policies, beliefs, and speeches, whether it's Kyle Rittenhouse trial or the trial for those who murdered Ahmaud Arbery, which it was in closing arguments, again, not touching those today, only because I can't really produce robust segments for them. And there's some really good stuff out there with the New York Times and other local media outlets. But nonetheless, here is the great Eddie Glaude yesterday on MSNBC, perfectly articulating the moment that we are in right now.
Right. I mean, look, we have to describe the elements within our country for what they are, right? And what we're seeing here is not only the exploitation of fear, We're seeing that fear mobilized to menace others, to beat them into submission, right? To threaten them into submission. This is the drumbeat of fascism, and I'm not being hyperbolic here. The illiberal elements of American life have always danced with, right, this ugly underbelly, this ugly underside of the modern West, where those who believe that their vision of the world must obtain, and they're willing to do anything to make it so. And they're defined not only as that violence, Nicole, that menace is not only directed toward others that look like me, or who have a different sexual orientation, who are women, who are immigrants, or the like. But it's also directed at those who would dare to ally themselves with the possibility of this new world. And here we are, right? In the middle of the battle.
In the middle of the battle. So well put by Eddie Glaude. Love that guy. A national treasure. Another national treasure is Heather McGhee. She also had made comments on Chris Hayes' show All In on MSNBC last night that I don't think need too much context or setup. Here's the great Heather McGhee, author of The Sum of Us.
That's exactly right. I mean, what we're seeing right now is self-interested elites spending billions of dollars broadly in the media and social media and in politics, and they're trying to teach Americans who think of themselves as white to reject democracy and the rule of law, to reject these sort of common norms if they have to share democracy with Americans of color. There's a lot of evidence about that. But as we think about this evidence that we keep seeing stack up, right, the backsliding that you spoke about at the top, as we think about all this evidence, my question has been, throughout our history, who wins when democracy is defeated, right? Who wins when property owners' rights are held above the pursuit of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness for everyday people, right? It is always the self-interested elites who are vying right now for the hearts and minds of white Americans. And they're saying reject democracy. And the problem is, Chris, they're winning in the Republican Party, right? A study by Larry Bartels shows that the majority of Republicans think that the traditional American way of life is disappearing so fast, right? This is demographic change, that we may have to use force to save it. A plurality thinks that patriotic Americans are going to have to take the law into their own hands. And this study was done and fielded before the big lie became the sort of common sense on the American right.
All right. Great commentary from both Eddie Glaude and Heather McGhee. And now let's go to my old friend Joe Madison, a.k.a. the Black Eagle on Urban View Sirius XM. Joe Madison, a legend in broadcasting. Well, apparently, I didn't know this, but he's been on a hunger strike for 2 weeks. Joe is always doing all kinds of really important publicity stunts in ways, and I'm not minimizing it. And I think these things are important to do. In this case, Joe's trying to bring attention to the fact that the only thing that really matters right now in Congress and America legislatively is to get the Voting Rights Act renewed and pass these voting and voter rights laws in Congress. Here is Joe Madison explaining it himself. And I'll try to get him on the show in the next couple of days.
This is my statement. While President Biden and the Senate prepared to enjoy their Thanksgiving recess with their family and friends, I will continue my hunger strike as the country celebrates how much to appreciate. I hope that each senator, I hope that each senator will reflect on how much we have to lose if our voting rights aren't protected. Therefore, I encourage the Senate, upon their return to Washington, to immediately convene and pass a bill that will protect our voting rights. And I close with this one thought. Thanksgiving, after all, is a word of action.
There you go. A word of action and a man of action, a mentor and a friend to me at Sirius. And I reached out to him to ask him to join me to talk about that. Always a great conversation when we get the legend Joe Madison on. So looking forward to having him on the podcast for the first time. And finally, in terms of audio that I've got for you, it's a pretty big and important story that President Biden yesterday announced that Jerome Powell would stay as the chairman of the Federal Reserve, preserving the continuity there. President Joe Biden selected him for a second term as chair and elevated this woman, Lal Brainard, to vice chair as the U.S. Central Bank grapples with the fastest inflation in 3 decades and the lingering effects of COVID-19. Here's just a brief clip of President Biden yesterday making the announcement.
I'm nominating Jerome Powell for a second term as chair of the Federal Reserve. And I'm nominating Lael Brainerd to take the position as vice chair of the Federal Reserve. When our country was hemorrhaging jobs last year and there was panic in our financial markets, Jay's steady and decisive leadership helped to stabilize markets and put our economy on track to a robust recovery. Jay is a believer in the benefits of what economists call maximum employment.
Well, Chris Hayes had Nobel Prize-winning economist, New York Times columnist Paul Krugman on to ask Paul Krugman about that. Here are his thoughts on that appointment or reappointment.
Right now, the pandemic has created a ton of lingering economic uncertainty, including the largest increase in inflation in over 30 years. And so many consider renominating Jerome Powell to be a controversial move, even though it does represent continuity in very tumultuous times. Paul Krugman is a Nobel Prize-winning economist, opinion columnist for New York Times, where he writes about macroeconomics and policy, and he joins me now. And, you know, I'm very curious to hear your thoughts on Powell because I've seen arguments in a million different directions about whether this was the right way to go. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting, the choice was between a monetary dove who thinks that inflation is probably transitory and is reluctant to raise rates, and a monetary dove who thinks that inflation is probably transitory and reluctant to. I mean, there really wasn't very much air between Jay Powell and Lael Brainerd, who was the other likely choice on this. And so in terms of the issues that seem likely right now, it just doesn't look like there's a big deal. Yes, Powell is a Republican or was a Republican. I think he's rational, and that almost makes him not a Republican now. But in terms of his actual policy stance, he's pretty much in line with a lot of the Democratic Party. It's not clear that there was a crucial policy issue at stake here, and Biden probably just didn't want to fight on this particular front.
All right, one more clip from Paul Krugman on MSNBC last night when Chris Hayes asked him about how Jerome Powell handled the pandemic.
Yeah, his response. I mean, we came amazingly close to a real financial meltdown in March of last year, and Powell just threw an enormous amount of money at it. He basically responded extremely aggressively, and he has been very much in the camp that says, look, inflation might be a problem, but let's not rush. We've made that mistake too often of choking off an economic recovery before it really gets a chance to improve people's lives. And so I think it's very, very hard for anybody for progressives to have a complaint there. He does have a history, but the Fed does regulate banks. It plays a role to some extent on other fronts. And Powell has not always been what the people on the center left would have wanted there. But it's not clear that, first of all, that's really what's crucial now. And second, that Powell is still the person who was maybe a little bit slower on that front than you might have wanted 10 years ago.
Yeah, we should say Elizabeth Warren has come out against him and says that it's no secret I oppose his renomination. I will vote against him. And then she cites this. His failure in regulation, climate, and ethics makes the still vacant position of vice chair of supervision critically important. Vice chair of supervision is that more specifically regulatory role. But there's also the question about, like, what next, right? And this big, we have inflation. It is high. It's the highest it's been in 30 years. People don't like it. I mean, I think there's a certain amount of kind of, there's a whipping up into a frenzy about it. The media is partly doing, but also people can tell when things cost more and they don't like it. And this huge question before us, which is, does it persist? If so, for how long, and what the Fed does about it? How are you thinking about that?
Okay. I mean, this is a hard one. I mean, this is very different. The inflation fears of 10 years ago were clearly silly. This time, this is a tougher one. The best bet still, I mean, we have not in fact had massive spending in this economy. Spending has been not all that high relative to past trends, but what we've had is all of these constraints of clogged ports and insufficient warehouse space. And then also the Great Resignation, a lot of people reluctant to go back to jobs, and nobody knows how long that lasts. There's a balancing of risks. There is the risk that inflation can become embedded that it'd be hard to get rid of. But on the other hand, there's the risk that, look, the American Rescue Plan, the big spending is receding in the rearview mirror now. And if you tighten, you might be tightening just at the moment when the economy actually is going to start to falter. So you want people who are alert, who are willing. I mean, I think the odds are that by this time next year, we'll be saying, what was all that about? Why were people so worried about inflation? But we don't know that. But you want smart people at the Fed who are alert to the possibilities.
Well, there you go. That's all the sound I've gathered for you on today's Last 24. But there is, of course, more news that I wanted to get to, as there is every day, but don't have the time to get into all the details, okay? That's why I call this the News Dump, rapid fire headlines. And here is a brand new jingle from the great voiceover artist, musician, and actor Pete Coe out in San Francisco with a pleasant, family-friendly, Thanksgiving-inspired jingle.
Deep frying turkey man, hazard creating chump. He set his legs ablaze for today's news dump.
Oh dear. Wow. Why is there a tiny cat involved? That's a little bit disconcerting and confused. By the way, Pete Coe is going to apparently take the rest of the week off, which comes as a surprise to me. But here is just behind the scenes, our conversation about that on the Marco Polo app, where you go back and forth with each other.
Hey, you got your dump and your intro all uploaded. I'm going to be out for the next few days, just to give you a heads up. So the rest of the week, starting Wednesday, can't do it. Just to let you know. Have a good one.
Thank you for letting me know, but as you know, all time off requests need to go through HR. So I think you should probably tell them.
You don't have HR. It's just you. Is HR like Q or something?
Yeah, Pete's just an awesome guy, listener, talented, and loves to do the jingles. Doesn't actually work for me. Okay, well, here are those headlines. Let's get to it. Well, I guess it was about 20 years ago that Thanksgiving, the holiday season, started to creep into actual Thanksgiving Day when retailers began kicking off sales into the wee hours of the morning on Black Friday. 10 years later, Target and other major stores opened their doors on the holiday itself, creating a new shopping tradition because you can't make enough money if you're a giant company like Target. Well, they announced that they're no longer going to open their stores on Thanksgiving Day this year, making a permanent shift to the unofficial start of the holiday season that was suspended during the pandemic. Still waiting to see if other major retailers will follow suit, such as Walmart and others. Macy's will not open its stores on Thanksgiving for the second year in a row. Well, last year was a pandemic. Kohl's and Walmart will also be closed apparently on Thursday, but Walmart hasn't made a decision on the future of Thanksgiving Day store shopping. Friday, of course, is a big online shopping day. For the past 2 years, the holiday trailed only Cyber Monday and Black Friday in online stores, according to Adobe Digital Economy Index, whatever the hell that is. I should say Thursday will still be a big online shopping day, not Friday. Of course, Friday is. And a NASA astronaut named Jessica Watkins will be the first black woman on the International Space Station Cruz. She's joining the SpaceX Crew 4 mission for her historic first trip to space, to become the first black woman to embark on a long-duration mission at the space station, where she'll live and conduct research in the microgravity laboratory as it orbits Earth. This will be her first journey to space since becoming an astronaut in 2017, and she's scheduled to lift off in April 2022 from the Kennedy Space Center in Florida. Hey, let's take a look at October home sales, because they hit the fastest pace since January. Sales of previously occupied U.S. homes ticked higher in October, marking their strongest pace since January, even as resilient demand and competition for relatively few properties in the market kept prices climbing. Alex Vega at the Associated Press writes, And I like this story. Climate change isn't what's driving some U.S. coal-fired power plants to shut down. It's the expense of stricter pollution controls on their wastewater. Dozens of plants nationwide plan to stop burning coal this decade to comply with the more stringent federal wastewater guidelines, according to state regulatory filings, as the industry continues moving away from planet-warming fossil fuel to make electricity. That's right, coal-fired power plants to close after a new wastewater rule. And this is good government, in my opinion, protecting what is in the public's interest and the interest of our natural environment. Come on, son. About time. I saw this headline over at Bloomberg. Apple accelerates work on car project aiming for fully autonomous vehicle. Apple's pushing to accelerate development of its electric car and is refocusing the project around full self-driving capabilities, according to people familiar with the matter, aiming to solve a technical challenge that has bedeviled the auto industry. How about that? The Apple car will soon be a reality? Soon? What do I know? I'm not reading the rest of the article. This is the news dump. And federal officials said Monday they're seeking more than $160,000 in fines from 8 airline passengers over incidents involving alcohol. So be warned. The Federal Aviation Administration said the biggest single proposed fines, topping $40,000, involves a passenger who brought alcohol on the plane, drank it, smoked marijuana in a laboratory, and sexually assaulted a flight attendant on a Southwest Airlines jet in April. That'll cost you $40,000, asshole. I like it. All right, that is your news dump for today, Tuesday, the 23rd of November. Now it's time for my very special conversation with two of the most respected scientists in their field. Dr. Michael Mann is a climate scientist at Penn State. Dr. Peter Hotez is a vaccine expert, virologist at Baylor University. They both have a lot of other responsibilities, titles. They've both written several books. They're both on TV all the time. You can learn more about both of their biographies and credentials in the show notes, but trust me, they're the best, which is why I'm very excited to have them on together. This is my idea. I thought, hey, both these guys are always on media, on TV, writing and talking about what they know best, and they're also being attacked for it. They are being attacked because they are scientists, and there's an anti-science movement underway, in case you didn't notice it. So I wanted to talk about that with them and have them join together. They'd never met, and this is the first time. They both had mutual respect for each other, knew of each other's work. As you can tell, really, they're both very familiar with it. But this is the first time that they had met, at least virtually, and I was very excited to host them in this conversation. You'll notice the first time Peter Hotez speaks, by the way, his microphone's touched to crap out, but I just told him to get a little closer, and that fixed it. Don't fret. Audio was pretty good. I was very happy with the conversation, and you should follow both of them and let them know that you heard them and here on the show. I'll post the video on youtube.com/standup ASAP at Peter Hotez, at Michael E. Mann. Here we go. Okay. Well, I've got Dr. Peter Hotez and Dr. Michael Mann. They are meeting each other virtually for the first time, and this is super exciting for me, for the podcast, and for our community. And I just want to start by thanking you both. I've been interviewing both of you. I've gotten to know both of you well and become really friendly with both of you, and I just appreciate how generous you have been to me with your time and educating me and my audience over the years. Thank you both so much for all of your time, and I'm so glad to have you both here.
Well, thank you. And I'm going to just say a word about Michael. Michael, even though we haven't met either virtually or in person, you've been a huge supporter and source of support because, you know, as a climate change scientist, you endured the first wave of political aggression. And so I've learned so much from you because I've been dealing with it for 20 years, but never at this level. So the anti-vaccine aggression has now reached the climate change aggression. And so learning from you and getting advice, I can't tell you how appreciative I've been and my family too.
Well, that's very kind of you, Peter, and right back at you. And, you know, I do feel like we are sort of brothers in arms here. And so it's wonderful to actually finally come face to face and to do so with our good friend Pete. So
Absolutely.
I'm looking forward to this conversation.
Yeah, I don't even really need to be here. I kind of just want to hear you guys talk to each other about your experiences, because the subject that we're talking about, the common theme here between climate science and vaccine technology and virus science is an ideologically motivated anti-science campaign to create denial and skepticism and so much more. And Michael, as Peter said, you've been in the trenches for a long time dealing with these players. And I guess before you'd probably talk about the tobacco industry and their campaign. How similar is the criticism, is the attack, and where would you start on the attack on science in modern day America?
Yeah, well, thanks, Pete. I mean, it is something that has been going on for decades, and it didn't start with, COVID-19, and it didn't start with climate change. It started decades ago, as you allude to, for example, with tobacco, where the findings of science found themselves on a collision course with some powerful vested interests. And in that case, it was the tobacco industry. And, we've heard this story so many times now. Their own internal scientists knew about the deadly nature of their product. They knew that it was highly addictive, and their internal reports were buried. And instead, the tobacco industry, as we all know, engaged in a decades-long effort to discredit the independent science that came to the same conclusions as their own scientists. Rather than coming forward and owning up to the problem, they invested tens of millions of dollars in a massive disinformation campaign. And the fossil fuel industry has run with that same playbook. It's the same story. ExxonMobil, the world's largest publicly held fossil fuel company, back in the early 1980s, successfully predicted how warm the planet would be today if we continued with business as usual burning of fossil fuels. And in their own internal reports that were ultimately leaked to the public, they referred to the consequences as catastrophic. That's not Al Gore. That's not Michael Mann. That's ExxonMobil's own scientists. But what did they do? They doubled down in a campaign to discredit the science and to lead us all astray.
And then I think from the anti-vaccine side, it started somewhat independently, but now there's been a convergence and a confluence. So it was, in the modern form, the anti-vaccine movement was very much around false claims of links between vaccines and autism. And I spent years going up against this. And I wrote a book, Vaccines Did Not Cause Rachel's Autism, about my daughter. And people have spoken about this before, even pre-pandemic. I think the game changer started around the 2010s, where I think the anti-vaccine movement was losing ground or losing influence. And so they became a political movement. They got themselves adopted by the Republican Tea Party, the far right and other far right-wing elements in the United States. And it really accelerated first here in Texas, where I am. And so I watched this whole thing unfold with the formation of political anti-vaccine political action committees, PACs, and then, of course, during COVID-19, it all really accelerated. And you're seeing this far right aggression. I don't even call it misinformation or disinformation.
Right. Peter, let me just stop you. If you could pull that mic up a little closer to you, I think I'm losing you a little bit. If you can, yeah. So yeah, you were saying you don't call it, you call it aggression. Is that what you said?
Yeah, I call it anti-science aggression, and it's and because I think to just call it misinformation or disinformation sort of kind of trivializes it or makes it sound like it's no biggie, no big deal, and this is part of a larger, clearly a far-right authoritarian movement that's targeting the science and the scientists. And it's got organization, it's got money, it's able to cultivate its own collection or bullpen of contrarian intellectuals or pseudo-intellectuals. And so I'm looking around at, are there other examples of this? Is this totally new with the vaccines? And then I came across Michael's writing about climate change. I said, this is going by a similar playbook. And I even trace it back to what Stalin did during the 30s. That is part of a way to exert authoritarian rule. You had to discredit the science and scientists. So it's actually, this goes back almost 100 years to
Lysenkoism. Absolutely. Yeah.
And they allowed thousands of Soviet peasants to die because of this fake vernalization theory. And work to discredit the science and scientists, insert their own pseudo-intellectuals in place. I said, this is what's happening now. And
Peter, they
similar
jailed
deadly
science.
Consequences. And this was
They jailed.
That's right. They've sent them to. Well, at least they haven't sent me to the. They haven't sent me to the gulag yet. But,
no, not yet.
But we'll see. But the thing that gets me the most exercise is this is no longer a theoretical or ethereal discussion. It's now a killer. I calculate starting in June 1 in my state of Texas, where anti-science aggression is at its worst, 20,000 unvaccinated Texans since June 1 this year, or the last 5 months or so, 6 months, have unnecessarily lost their lives to COVID-19. They are 20,000 Texans who are defiant of getting vaccinations who felt that to be show allegiance to whatever this thing is, whether it's authoritarianism or the far right or what some used to call the Republican Party, is now the leading killer of young people in the state of Texas. That's how awful this has gotten. And this is why I'm so outspoken. And this is why, taking inspiration from Michael, endure the pushback, not only from the bad guys, but also, from my colleagues who say, Peter, you're not supposed to talk about Republicans and Democrats or conservatives or liberals. You're not supposed to be political. Well, I'm not being political. Those guys are being political. I'm just saying the anti-science doesn't belong in the politics. Yeah. But, I just haven't figured out a way to talk about it without talking about it.
Yeah.
Peter, as I like to say, we didn't come to the politics. The politics came to us.
Yeah.
We didn't choose to have the science politicized in this way, weaponized in this way.
What does it mean for both of you when you hear that phrase, you're politicizing the science, stop politicizing the science? There are disagreements amongst your colleagues and yourselves. There are all kinds of issues when it comes to research and funding and so on. But what do you hear when you hear that? When you're saying either stop politicizing the science yourself, or you're being accused of politicizing the science, Michael?
Yeah, again, I say I didn't come to the politics came to me. The hockey stick curve when we published it more than 2 decades ago was inconvenient to some powerful special interests because it laid bare the profound impact that we're having on the climate, the unprecedented warming that is taking place due to fossil fuel burning. And I found myself under assault, much in the way that Peter finds himself under assault today, by, again, ideologically motivated forces of anti-science, in many cases weaponized by, a Republican Party that realizes that they can, drum up support for their agenda by throwing out this red meat, by portraying scientists like Peter and myself as villains. It's a way, ultimately, for these special interests to weaponize a large sector of the population for their purpose. There's no natural reason that Republicans should want to die, but they've elected to do so by ignoring the public health messaging by people like Peter. And here's the thing, that is playing out on an accelerated time frame. We're able to see almost in real time the deadly nature of ideologically motivated anti-science. With climate change, even more lives will ultimately be lost if we fail to act. But in a sense, we've been provided with this sort of accelerated analogy that allows us to talk about, how ignoring what scientists have to say can be deadly. And, every Hollywood film, dystopian Hollywood film, supposedly, starts out with somebody ignoring a scientist. That's the old adage. Well, that's literally what's happening with these twin crises that are playing out. And the result is deadly and disastrous, ultimately, for us and the planet.
What would you say, Peter, the same, question?
Anti-science is now the leading killer of young people in the United States. And then I can back it up with real numbers. We have the numbers out of Texas from the Institute for Health Metrics and numbers on the percentage unvaccinated. It's all there for anyone to look at. And so where are the sources? The sources are coming from 3 or 4 sources that I can easily identify. One, members of the U.S. Congress, extraordinary as it is. And you heard it from Representative Taylor Greene, who calls vaccinators brown shirts, or she calls them Nazi vaccinators. Or what's that guy, Cawthorn, who says first they're going to vaccinate you, and then they're going to take away your guns and your Bibles. And as ridiculous as that sounds to us, there's a segment of the population who believes it. And we have 2 senators that are actively promoting an anti-vaccine agenda, Rand Paul and Senator Johnson from Wisconsin. Then you have it all amplified on the conservative news outlets. Yep. I mean, you watch Fox News anchors at night and some of the other conservative news channels, and they go after me. I had Laura Ingraham and the governor of Florida go after me the other day, and I'm like, why's the governor of Florida going? I mean, I took the kids to Disney World once. Oh my God. I mean, I'm a medical school professor in Texas. Why is the guy? So that's really damaging. But the third, and for me, one of the most troubling, are somehow they've co-opted very important professors at Harvard and Stanford and places like that, and these far-right think tanks that have, they're very clever. They'll take these facts and factoids and string them together to create an entirely false narrative. And unfortunately, what happens is a lot of the news anchors and journalists, reporters, they don't know the subject in as much depth as I do, so they can't debunk it right there on camera. So it sounds plausible. But let's
just tell both sides.
Tell both sides, and that is scary. I mean, what drives people to say such knowingly false things about vaccines and COVID? I mean, that's really troubling.
Well, you mentioned Congress, then the right-wing media atmosphere, certain people in Congress, and then certain people in academia. I'm not sure if what order you would put it in, but I think it all starts with media, and then politicians and even academics pick up on it and run with it. But it's often about the most obvious thing, which is making money, dividing people, getting ratings. So and that's the one I understand the most myself, because I've been working with these people.
And Pete, we've seen this for decades, right? With the tobacco wars, with climate change. You put enough money out there, you can buy off people with impressive sounding credentials. Yeah. And I'll just tell the story of Frederick Seitz, who was the president of the National Academy of Sciences. Basically the highest.
He was president of Rockefeller University.
Where
I did my Ph.D.
Yeah, absolutely. And he was a theoretical physicist in the field of condensed matter physics, which is where I actually got my start. So it's sort of interesting, these connections. But what's most relevant is the way he sold out. He was offered millions of dollars from an organization called the George Marshall Institute, which was a front group for fossil fuel interests. And he was paid literally hundreds of thousands of dollars to attack any science that was inconvenient to them. And that, of course, included climate science. He ended up, in fact, signing his name to an article. It was just something they wrote up. It wasn't a real scientific article, but it was formatted to look like it was in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences. And it was a bunch of cranks denying that climate change was real. This was formatted to look like, a prestigious publication of the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences, and sent out to hundreds of thousands of scientists. And all that money, that was fossil fuel money that was behind all that. So, yeah, they can always find bad actors who are willing to sell out.
And I'm not even sure it's always for money. I get the sense that there's people reach my age and our age, and some people just get desperate for relevancy and are willing to talk themselves into God knows what. And that's right. And people make a big fuss over them, and they go on high, So I think that's a component.
When it comes to commonality here, people come into it. People allow themselves to be weaponized for various reasons. It can be money. It can be just sort of you're late in your career, and this is a way to suddenly get back on the main stage and have a large audience. There are any number of reasons that a scientist can allow themselves to be used in that way. The commonality is that there are millions of dollars to broadcast that message. Right. The echo chamber that uses that to advance an agenda. And that's industry money. And it is a small number of players, relatively small number of players, as Peter notes. The Murdoch media empire, that's Rupert Murdoch, the Koch brothers, now just the Koch brother, the Scaife Foundation's right-wing foundations. There is this ecosystem, but it's funded by a relatively small number of bad actors.
So when it comes to just another question that's perfect for both of you, I think. You both have two of the most impressive resumes in academia and science. I can't even talk about the things that your resumes say. That's how dumb I am. But that's what makes me so frustrated as someone in the media trying to ask you guys questions, trying to find answers, critical thinking is I did my own research, gentlemen. I've done my own research on vaccines. I've done my own research on climate, and I conducted it here from my shed with a keyboard and an internet connection. You got a degree
from the University of Google, don't you?
I have a degree from Google University and AOL State, and I, gentlemen, am an expert here. How do you talk to people? How can you convince people that while you appreciate them looking into things and quote, doing their own research, it's not the same, Peter, as having years of experience, many degrees, and most importantly, practicing science yourself all the time? What's the difference? How do we tell those people they don't necessarily need to do their own science? They need to be able to trust people like you guys.
Well, as I say, it's not even like they're doing their own research. They did not even a Google search anymore. Google has done a little better now at trying to filter out some of the stuff. They did a Yahoo or other search, which still, if you put my name into it, still has me as public enemy #1 or the original gangster villain, as they call me.
Yeah, I think I saw an image of you drinking the blood of children.
Yeah.
I'm so sorry for laughing at that.
It's the thing we do. So that's the first thing, and I try to look at them as themselves victims, right? They're victims of this weaponized health communication or weaponized science communication or anti-science aggression, and it's tough. It depends how far down the rabbit hole they've gone, and if you can get enough time with them, usually you can talk them into getting vaccinated. But I think the thing that troubles me the most now is the way we're seeing elected officials talk, or now even the sports figures, right? You heard it from, Aaron Rodgers and other people that, not to single out Aaron Rodgers. He's not alone on this, but what what you'll hear is sometimes they'll even say they got vaccinated, or, they're not anti-vaccine. So when someone says they're not anti-vaccine, that bells and whistles go off. That's like the guy who says it's not about the money, and it's all about the money. Right? So they'll say, I'm not anti-vaccine, but then they'll say everyone has their freedom of choice to make their own decisions. And that's the language. This comes out of this health freedom movement that accelerated in Texas in the early 2010s. And that's the reason given for it. So this is how it's become politicized as a far-right movement linked to this health freedom. It's all bullshit, but it's and that's what you need. And so that's when I call out the NFL and the NBA and our elected officials. Don't say that. When you say that, that creates that false equivalency again. It's either health freedom and ivermectin or getting vaccines, and it's not that way. It's only vaccines that are going to save your life.
Michael, what about you would do your own research? Because, a few years back, there was this research project done that a lot of us, I think, relied on, and we're pretty depressed by. That research showed that with certain segment of population, even when you give them all of the arguments, all that, not only do they not have their minds changed, they're not enlightened, they actually dig in even deeper. Well, recently, apparently, that science has been debunked. It's not necessarily the case. So maybe we can convince those people who are really dug in on issues that are around climate, around COVID. What do you say to people who say, I've done my own research, and how do you convince those people that are really, really already convinced against all the science and data that you have?
Yeah, I mean, you have to at some point distinguish between those who do see this entirely through an ideological lens. It's part of the tribal identity of being a conservative today, is to deny the basic public health science now of COVID-19, and to deny the science of climate change, or at least to deny that it's a problem that we need to deal with. It's sort of hard to deny that it's happening now because people can see the catastrophic consequences, but there's still an effort to deny that it's really a problem that we need to do something about. And, so if somebody is so dug in their, in their heels, in rejecting the science, probably the last person that they want to hear from is an ivory-towered, pointy-headed scientist like myself. And so it's important to have a variety of trusted messengers that can speak to different audiences. And you have people, for example, in the national security community or in the business world or evangelical Christians who are sometimes effective with those audiences because they're part of that tribe and they have more street cred in talking to them. So at some point, you have to say, all right, I'm not the best person to be talking to this particular audience, but, I would suggest that you invite so-and-so to speak with them. And then I tend to focus my efforts on what I call the confused middle. These aren't people who are ideologically opposed to the science, but they are caught in the crossfire. They're victims of the misinformation and the disinformation. And with some knowledge and especially with some resources, they can be brought along from sort of, again, that confused, uncommitted sort of middle category. We can move them into the engaged category because we don't need to win over the entire public. That's never going to happen in our tremendously divided, politics that we have here today in the United States. But we can get enough people on board to advance reasonable policy action. And we're sort of seeing that, I think, on COVID-19. I'm interested in Peter's thoughts. We're making progress, but much more slowly than we should have because of that disinformation campaign.
Yeah, the problem is this. We're reaching now about 60% of the U.S. population fully vaccinated, although soon that's going to mean 3 doses of the mRNA vaccine. But I think we'll address that. I think the problem is we need to get to about 85% of the U.S. population, not the adult population, entire U.S. population. That's a quarter of the country. And let's face it, we got a quarter of the country, deeply dug in on far-right conspiracy theories. And that's going to be the toughest part of trying to identify Republican or whatever we call this party now, the far-right leaders that can finally understand that this is so self-defeating and wiping out the lives of so many people. And it's been tough to find those individuals.
Pete, just a question. We will ultimately reach herd immunity one way or the other, right? And so at this point, it's a question of how we reach it.
Well, I'm not so sure now because when you look at what's happening with people who are infected and recovered, if they do not get vaccinated, the rate of reinfection is at least twice as high as those who do get vaccinated afterwards. So it's not all that durable as people like to make it out to be. The Delta variant, which in itself is an anti-vaccine talking point now. And they look at the study coming out of Israel that has some big issues with it, but no. So I don't really even include those infected individuals and recovered as contributing to that herd immunity. Maybe a little bit, but it's short-lived. And you're at high risk of getting that Delta variant, which is so highly transmissible. Yeah. And it's about to happen again. I mean, this next big winter wave looks pretty bad to me. It's already happening in Michigan and the upper Midwest and Minnesota and Wisconsin. And it's going to, Mother Nature's not being coy here. She told us she's going to give us a big summer wave across the South in 2021 because she did that in 2020 and she did. And now she's telling us once again what she's going to do. And when you only have, if you have 40% of the country unvaccinated, that's still a lot of warm water for Hurricane Delta to pass over. So we're in for some terrible times, I think, once again.
Well put.
You have referenced, I think just as metaphors, 3 times Dr. Mann's expertise. He just asked you a question. Do you have a question with him about whether or not we're going to continue to have winters in the future, or if it's really, you mentioned Hurricane Delta, real hurricanes. I mean, how do you two know, you two respect each other? How do you, as experts, vet out other experts when you see them in media or elsewhere? How can we, who aren't experts, know who to trust? Because that seems to be the issue that we're having now, that we are questioning, there's some bad scientists, sometimes there's some bad science, and then science is not perfect. And so when you get something wrong and then you later correct it, given new data, and you change it, you're then indicted as being, some kind of a criminal, when in fact you're just conducting science. How do you know who to trust? How can we know who to trust? Peter?
Well, sometimes and sometimes people are very clever, almost to the point of being diabolical in how they mask it. But one of the things that I have found in the contrarian intellectuals or pseudo-intellectuals is if you disagree with them and you try to explain why their thinking is flawed on this, they immediately become very aggressive. They've got a very short fuse, and they get pretty angry, and they start bringing in other people, and they start to gang tackle. So that, to me, is always a red flare that there's something else going on here.
What about you, Peter? Michael, how do you know who to trust or not? Not necessarily think much about.
So if you're a scientist, you know that the things to look at are they actually doing the down in the trenches work? Are they just talking heads, or are they actually doing the science? In Peter's case, I believe you've written a widely used textbook about this stuff. You publish in the peer-reviewed literature. We've
been developing coronavirus vaccines for 10 years. And
right. I mean, you're doing the actual work, and so he's not just talking the talk, he's walking the walk when it comes to the basic underlying science. To me, that's, what gives me so much respect for Peter and makes me listen to him very carefully, because this is a public health threat to me and my family. And I need reliable information. And I know when Peter appears, on MSNBC, that I can trust what he's saying. Now, I'm a scientist, so it's pretty easy for me to sort of navigate those treacherous waters. Much more difficult for the general public, because, as Peter says, the forces of misinformation are very skilled at using the language, of co-opting the language of science, the lexicon, the jargon, and attaching impressive sounding titles to themselves that don't actually stand up to scrutiny, but to the person on the street, make them sound like, hey, there's somebody to be listened to. And as Peter also alluded to, the media isn't always our friend here. This is less and less true with climate change, but it's still true to some extent. And it's certainly true when it comes to coronavirus. There's this tendency to treat contrarians who represent a fringe movement and not mainstream consensus science, to put them on an equal footing when it comes to how we litigate this on television and in the media. And so there really is a responsibility on the part of journalists to not fall victim to this sort of journalism 101 idea that you have two people on the stage with opposing viewpoints. Right. That's not the way it works in science. There aren't two equally credible views when it comes to the reality of climate change or the public health threat, that we face in COVID-19.
And there are certain catchphrases that they use that you have to head for the hills when you hear it. If someone says the science isn't settled, just go. It's like the horror movie where the voice goes, "Get out, just go."
The sound science is another one of those.
Right. I like to use the word consensus as much as possible. I feel like that's a more convincing argument, or at least word to use. But
they actually try to co-opt that as well, though. They'll say, "Oh yeah, those scientists are just holding hands around a campfire singing Kumbaya. We can't trust them. It's a conspiracy." And the consensus just indicates that the conspiracy is deeper and wider as far as they are concerned.
Where is that campfire that you guys meet and hold hands? So you both are pretty well known now because of your media appearances. I think, as I turn to solutions here towards the end of our conversation, it's about educating people. It's about communicating in a way that we can understand. You're both excellent communicators. You're both scientists. You're both highly respected in your fields, and you're both making television appearances and appearances on all types of media, which is, I think, super important. People then, and I've seen this over and over with both of you, accuse you of all kinds of things, of trying to get rich and famous and all of that. I am so glad that both of you make all of these media appearances. It's so helpful. I love to see you on TV, radio, whatever, read your Twitter timelines. What do you say to those people in terms of why you make these television appearances, Peter? It's how many Rolls Royce do you have? How many islands do you live on, Peter Hotez?
Yeah, I mean, I've never taken money from CNN or MSNBC or any podcast except for the couple of million that you're going to send me after this. But other than that,
it's all in bow ties.
Yeah, so I don't take money for media appearances, and I'm a salaried professor at the Baylor College of Medicine and Texas Children's Hospital. It's a good salary, and I've been able to put three of my four kids through college, except for my special needs daughter, and And Ann says we might even pay off my first mortgage at the age of 63 next year. So I'm excited. So I'm not complaining, but I don't take money. We don't take money from the pharma companies. What is interesting, though, is how the aggression from the anti-vaccine community, the far right, is all about the money, right? That they're assuming it must be because I'm getting paid and this kind of stuff. And because that's what they're all about. They're all about the grift and all about the money. So, you know what? The way people criticize you itself is very, very telling. It's a bitch projection.
Yeah.
Same question for you, Michael. Why, you're doing this all for nefarious reasons?
Absolutely. As Peter says, this is projection, right? And it's very clever. It's sort of Karl Rove politics of, accusing your opponent of the very thing that you are guilty of as a way of both tarring them and immunizing yourself. Because, of course, I don't drive a Maserati like Joe Manchin. I don't make lots of money from coal investments that allows me to drive around in a Maserati. And like Peter, I don't live an extravagant lifestyle. I do okay, but if I really wanted to get rich, what I would be doing was working for the fossil fuel industry and attacking scientists like myself. I would renounce all of my science, and I would go around using my credentials to attack other scientists. I would make a lot of money doing that, but I would be destroying the planet, and I wouldn't be able to live with myself. And frankly, I don't know how some of these people do, but that's sort of where it is.
And by the way, we talk about this at great peril. Peril not only because, I get the emails that the Army of Patriots is going to hunt me down, and I don't know why you need an Army of Patriots. As I say, it's just me and Ann and Rachel and the cat. I think one or two Patriots. But the other side to that is, I'm more worried about what my colleagues think, because, again, it's not polite, or you're not supposed to talk about Republicans and Democrats, liberals or conservatives. And I remember, when Trump in March last year was really rolling out the disinformation campaign. COVID was a hoax. It was the flu, hydroxychloroquine, the hospital admissions for catch-up and elective surgeries. I remember, Ann, my wife, who's usually the one, because I'm usually sort of the unfiltered one. Ann is the really conservative one who holds me back from saying this and that. She looked at me. She said, look, you don't want, you have to say something, because if you don't, 6 months from now, you're going to realize all this lost lives. You'll feel terrible if you don't. So that's all I needed to hear, and I just let it rip. But the hard part was the silence from the professional and scientific societies, and in some cases, even the national academies were silent. So I was really out there, and that was the scariest part for me. That wasn't not the words of the enemies, but the silence of the friends. That was the hardest part. And now it's better. Now people are coming to my side, and so I feel more comfortable doing it. But there were some rough times out there.
Here's the thing, Peter. I think, our colleagues, there was a time when, yes, the era of Carl Sagan, you were vilified by some of your fellow scientists for becoming a popularizer. It was unbecoming of a scientist to do that.
That's why Carl Sagan got denied tenure at Harvard, because
that's right.
He wanted to go to Cornell for that.
That's absolutely right. And he was blackballed from the National Academy of Sciences despite having done, critical work that should earn anybody admission to the National Academy. But there was this sort of, he was a pariah in some scientific circles because he was a communicator, and he would engage with the public, and he would at times take on positions that were political, that had implications for policy. Here's the thing. I think that our colleagues mostly today get it. They understand how politicized science has become. They can recognize anti-science when they see it, and they know it's coming from one half of our political spectrum, but they're scared as hell. And the silence comes from the terror of, what would happen to me if I were to, to speak out as well. And they see folks like yourself and me and others who are out there become vilified, get attacked, get hauled, into hostile congressional hearings. And I think that's why it's so important for us to continue to do what we're doing, to show that you can do it, that you can survive the onslaught, and set an example for other scientists who are increasingly coming out onto the stage.
I agree, Michael. The young people, they're all in. They're saying, well, how do I do this? The problem is the ecosystem of science doesn't make it comfortable for you to do it. We still get the message from, our Office of Communications understands it, but most universities, especially academic health centers, they're very risk averse, and they don't want their docs and their scientists speaking out. Or if they do, the message that gets sent to them is you do it at your own peril. And certainly, when you get evaluated annually, I get evaluated annually too. And what do they ask me? They ask me about my scientific papers and my grants, right? They're not asking me about, public communication and in any form with even my single author books, they don't ask me about. So the message is that reaching out to the public, communicating with the public about science is not valued. Totally. And in fact, it's not even welcome because it potentially puts the institution or exposed the institution.
That's exactly right.
It would be easy for me to say that Baylor University and Penn State benefit from your appearances on media. You're getting them a lot of publicity. I mean, I think people could easily say that, but you're saying that's not necessarily the case. It's a little bit counterintuitive.
Well, no, Baylor College of Medicine, Texas Children have been fine. They've been terrific, but a lot of institutions aren't. I mean, I won't name them, but I know of institutions that have actually terminated faculty for speaking out. That's how bad it is. Some of the academic health centers than and especially and I think it's probably worse. It's at a place like where you are, Michael, a state university, especially if it's in a place where there's a conservative legislature that has a lot of power. And it's funny. I have my science co-partner at our Texas Children's Center for Vaccine Development, Mary Elena Batazzi. She's from Honduras, and the university is called the Autonomous University of Honduras, where she got her bachelor's degree. And you had to put the word autonomous in because otherwise assume that the state would exert unnecessary control. And maybe we have to start doing that here in the U.S.
Well, you've seen it. Isn't that what we saw, what you're saying? I feel like in Florida recently, the Florida governor and Republican legislature muzzled experts and public health experts in government. Do I have that right? Is that what happened?
Yeah, we have to create the Universidad Autónoma de Florida. Right? It's really bad, and I think what the DeSantis did has been among the most egregious. But I think it's happening probably in more subtle ways in a lot of red state, where public universities are in red states. So.
And Peter's absolutely right about that. There are few incentives in academia for sort of prioritizing outreach and public communication. It isn't considered or is considered very little in the promotion and tenure process. And in fact, you get a lot of grief, especially when you're a state university and there are powerful, vested interests within the state. Certainly, Pennsylvania has a very powerful natural gas industry, and they clearly have a horse in this race. And they use their influence in the Republican state house and any way they can to, make it uncomfortable. For example, for a university to support their academics speaking out about issues like climate change that represent a threat to these very powerful interests. And so you might think that, the university would support having faculty and researchers who are engaged in public outreach. But in many respects, as Peter says, if anything, they, in the end, tend to distance themselves from that. Hey, this person's just speaking as an individual. They don't represent the university. They don't represent our interests. It's sometimes just the opposite of what you would think. And that speaks to the very perverted incentive structure writ large when it comes not just to our universities, but our society right now.
Right. Well, gentlemen, I could talk to you for 10 more hours, but you got to go do science and research. I hope that as a result of you guys finally meeting here, you'll work on a book together or something, and I'll get a thank you there. But more importantly, I just want to give our friend Ali Velshi a hard time. You both join him on a regular basis. He's one of the best of the best. But you prefer to at least to look at me, right? Like the question is, am I more handsome than MSNBC's Ali Velshi? Michael Mann, you'll have to answer first.
Yeah, I mean, just on the hair alone, the facial hair alone gives you a more hirsute sort of look than Ali, who's really just clean,
very bold,
shaven all around.
Would you agree?
I don't know. I don't want to betray my brother Ali. That's a good-looking man there. So
I'm sorry. What are you saying that you have to give an answer? Are you saying that Ali Velshi is in fact better looking than me, or
no? I think you're both just handsome.
You're both just so handsome that we can't.
I aspire for the look of both.
Yeah, we just can't. We're just. Yeah, no, it's and Ali, by the way, has been great on the climate issue.
Yeah,
and there's some folks, at the major networks who really have tried to showcase this.
And I would say, actually, I mean, the truth is, most of the anchors that I've worked with at CNN and MSNBC work hard to get it right. I think that's fair to say, and PBS, and even Fox News hung in there with me for a while. The daytime anchors, anyway. And then finally, I got too radioactive for them, and they cut me off.
Do you either of you, brings up one last question, either of you get invitations from time to time, if not regularly, from big right-wing corporate media outlets, others that want to have you on?
I've said I'll speak to anybody. I've spoken on Newsmax. They haven't invited me on OANN. If Fox News invites me, I agree. If I did Daily Caller, I know. I mean, because and for a very practical reason, that 25% of the country to get vaccinated is what we need to do. And I've written to Joe Rogan a couple of times to get back on. He had me on pre-pandemic. We never had an issue, and he's brought on some guests I've not been happy with. I said, get me on, Joe, so I can talk to the country. Sure. Those are the people I need to reach to try to get them back. And I just want to save lives. I don't want to shame anybody. I don't want to embarrass anybody. Just enlist their help to vaccinate.
It's a great point. And you might, you're not going to get the yield that you might get in a more favorable media because you are dealing with this ideological audience. But if you can win over some of them, that's real progress, right? And, I haven't, more power to Peter for doing that. I haven't ventured quite as much into hostile territory as he has. But, when I get invitations to go on Fox News, I'll typically take them, because if you can even get a neutral interview in that sort of hostile territory, that's a huge win. Right. And there are actually some pretty good people.
And present the face that you're not devil incarnate, as the conservative news outlets like to portray us sometimes.
That's exactly right.
And I think that alone has some positive value.
You really should just completely give up and dress up as vampires on your next appearances. Just both of you, just wear horns.
Well, there are enough memes out there that have done that.
For sure. Yeah, exactly. Well, gentlemen, I cannot thank you enough. What an honor it has been to have both of you on and to just sit back, really, and listen. I hope to do it again, and I hope other people will do it as well. It's such an important issue, this confluence of issues that both of you have become, sadly, experts on in terms of dealing with all of these crazies and critics. So thank you very, very much. Keep up the good work and informing the public on what you guys know best. Thank you.
Thank you, Pete. This was very meaningful. I appreciate it. Thank you, Michael.
No, thank you. This was a wonderful opportunity, and I look forward to the next one.
I want to thank all of my producer.
I don't think you pay.
Yeah, right.
You pay him in Milk-Bone biscuits, or
she just gets biscuits, and she'll edit this thing right up.
All right,
gentlemen. Thank you very much. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right. Well, I was holding up my dog there at the end in case you couldn't figure that out. Dr. Peter Hotez, Dr. Michael Mann, so great. Please go thank them on Twitter at Michael E. Mann, at Peter Hotez. That'll mean a lot to me, to them, of course, and they'll probably get back to you. Also, I'll be posting that up ASAP on my YouTube channel, youtube.com/standup. If you haven't followed, subscribe to my YouTube. If you do any of the YouTubing, if you go on there, that's great for me. The more subscriptions over there, and it's free to subscribe, obviously, the better it is. Write a review on Apple iTunes. Who could bring these two guys together and conduct that type of interview? Nobody can. I'm the only one. That's it. I should get awards. No, I should just get your continued listening, I hope. I appreciate you very much. I think you know that. What am I grateful for this year? I'm grateful for you and all the new friends I have. And so supportive over the past couple of years. I cannot thank you enough. I'll keep doing my best to put out a great product for you to learn and enjoy from each and every day. Yeah, that's all I've got for you today. Tomorrow I've got Barry Ritholtz, I've got Kenneth C. Davis coming on this week, and some other guests that I'm planning to reach out to, but I don't want to announce yet. So I will be doing shows each and every day as you'll be in the car, maybe with friends and family on the way to friends and family. I want to give you something to listen to, enjoy, and learn along with me each and every day here on Stand Up. And now it's time for our Grammy Award-winning singer-songwriter, the great John Carroll, to take us out with our song. It's time to stand up. Have a great day, everybody.
Every lost child will finally be found. There's only one thing to do before we stand our ground, and that's stand up. Stand up. Well, the founding fathers saw the land for all. They had to stand up. They had to stand up. They had a keen imagination for a crystal ball, drawing all the plans of stand up. But all they had to go on was the time they were in, with other causes for laws, and since they weren't even sin, they knew that change was gonna come before the change could begin. They had to stand up. All right, they had to stand up. We got to stand up. We got to look the devil square in the eye. We gotta let him know it's his time to go, and make it clear when all we hear is a lie. Why you lying awake wondering where the money all went? It'll be the cost of freedom that'll go unspent. You can see him flee the scene of that experiment if you stand up. All right, we got to speak up. We got to reach up and raise your voice in every way you know how. Don't be toes up. You got to show up. Ain't no better time to do it but now. No need to pledge allegiance to no wanton tribe. Rise up, show obedience to the voice inside, and listen well, and it'll tell you not to run there.